We'll call to order the regular Board of Supervisors meeting for Tuesday, May 22nd, 2012. We will start with an invocation by Pastor David Stark from the Grace Presbyterian Church, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance by Supervisor Hartman. Pastor.
Thank you. I'd like to read a couple of verses before we pray. It's from Psalm 34. King David wrote, "I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. My soul shall make its boast in the Lord. The humble shall hear of it and be glad. O magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt his name together." Let us pray. Our gracious God and Heavenly Father, we thank you, Lord, for your love and your grace to us. We thank you for your kindness. We thank you for our lives that you've given to us and the measure of health that each one of us here enjoys. And Father, we thank you that you created all things, including each one of us as individuals. We thank you that you've given us families and friends. And we thank you that you ordained civil government for the good of your people and for all those, Lord, who live under it. And so we pray that you would bless the supervisors this day. We ask you to be with them, Lord. There are difficult decisions that they have to make, and so we ask you to give them wisdom, that you would give them understanding and discernment. We pray, Lord, that you would give them grace to hear all who come before them this day, the great and the small, Lord, whatever men or women see themselves, Lord, we know that you see us all equally. And so we pray that you give the supervisors grace and wisdom to hear all who come before them with impartiality, but give them wisdom and discernment in the decisions that they make, and bless them. And we thank you, Father, for Shasta County, for letting us live in this area where we see your beauty displayed so wondrously in the creation, and also, Lord, in the abundance of people that are here, Lord, and the smiles that we see and the friends that we have. And so we ask you to bless us now, and we pray that you would lead us in the paths of righteousness for your name's sake, and grant, Lord, that your peace would be triumphant and that we would all love one another as you have told us to do. So forgive us our sins and keep us in your love and in your grace. And I ask all this in the name of my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you. As we not only because we are approaching Memorial Day, but as we should every day, let us remember those that have given the ultimate sacrifice in defense of our country as we salute our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Pastor. Thank you, Supervisor Hartman. Next item is public comment period. Persons wishing to speak should come before to the podium here and give us their name for the record. And each person will be allowed 3 minutes to speak. Comments should be limited to matters within the jurisdiction of the board. Pursuant to the Brown Act, action or board discussion cannot be taken on open time matters other than to receive the comments and, if deemed necessary, to refer the subject matter to the appropriate department for follow-up and or to schedule the matter on a subsequent board agenda. We will start with Wallace Martins, followed by Gary Cadd.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Wallace Martins. I live in Palo Cedro, California, and I need your help. I'm trying to start an internet sales in an otherwise vacant enclosed building in Palo Cedro to sell automobiles, and didn't know exactly how I was going to approach this, so I think I'll just read you a very quick letter that I sent back to Mr. Simon of the Planning Division. Thank you for meeting me on Monday the 23rd, 2012. The purpose is to utilize an otherwise vacant building located at 9452 Deschutes Road in Palo Cedro. I intend to use the site in primarily the sale of automobiles. I plan to display a very small stock of about 4 vehicles in the building. My customer base comes via internet, word of mouth, and previous customers. Sales will be initiated by appointment. Signage will be approximately 3 feet by 3 feet. As we discussed prior to the use of this the prior use of this location has been an auto repair shop, I believe for well over 10 years. I spent well over a month filling out requirements forms, posting bonds, required insurance filings with the State Board of Equalization with the Department of Motor Vehicles. The cost has been substantial monetarily and physically. At age 63, I've been blessed with a successful 30-year career in the insurance industry in Humboldt County, where my company's insured municipalities, fire districts, water districts, school districts, police districts. I've been involved in the Rotary. I was the past president of the Humboldt Del Norte County Agents Association and a member of the Ingomar Club. My point is this. After all is said and done, I monetarily lost everything through 2008 and 2010. Broke me, being in the automobile business. All my retirement down to my life insurance dividends. So I have to start from scratch. So retirement is no longer an option, and I retired in 2000. So I'm now rebuilding in Palisadro, where I've lived for the last 12 years. And much like the small community that I came from, Fortuna, California, I find Palisadro to be a friendly, close-knit community, proud of their schools, proud of their local businesses. I want to grow with this community. I don't have a lot of working life left, but I want to spend it there. And I want to be interactive with the community, much like I was in Fortuna. I'd like to see some of their projects come to fruition. My business model allows me to interact with the community as only a business can, and continue to buy locally and generate tax revenue and contribute in ways to our county and community. I believe that my 3 minutes is up.
If you'd like to sum up what you can do that.
Thank you very much.
Just a couple.
Surely. It's been an experience. I'm no different than a lot of people. We work all of our lives and try to build a future and a future for our children. And something came along that was cataclysmic. Who'd ever thought we'd all be broke?
Mr. Martin, you are out of time, so if you just, I couldn't tell there's a request in there somewhere, or are you just...
The request is this: that it requires a use permit, and it's permitted as an auto repair shop. The auto retail sales requires another $5,000 permit, and it has to do with environmental and the stuff. But the auto sales and the auto repair, the auto repair's got to have more of a impact than anything.
Okay.
But thank you.
If you'd like to give your number
Yes.
for Mr. Haas.
530-515-9840. Yes, sir.
I'm sure he'll talk to you and give you some additional information.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Mr. Cadd, followed by Mr. Kirk.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, staff, ladies and gentlemen. I come before you this morning to speak about the Integrated Regional Water Management Group, and specifically the Northern California, the Northern Sacramento Valley Integrated Regional Water Group. Have been attending quite a number of these meetings between the board and then the TAC committee meetings. And the main thing that's driving this is the California Department of Water Resources. And the Department of Resources is using the Proposition 84-1E guidelines. It's quite 84 pages of quite a setup in these guidelines of how cities, county, community service districts can apply for water grants. Now in the state, if you want to get a state water grant, you have to go through this IRWM process. Well, in the IRWM process, there are 16 standards, of which this group has completed their goals and objectives. But of the 16 standards, there's also a portion called data management. data management is greenhouse gas management. And then there's also climate change, which is climate change, climate action plan. What this group, what the state is forcing this group to do is to put their goals and objectives into place, but the rest of the standards will be held off till next August of 13 to finish those up. What is happening is they're going out and requesting different projects to come forward. So let's say, for instance, that Centerville has a project, a $100,000 pipeline they want to put in, and so they apply for it. Once they apply for it, they start going through the IRWM process. Well, that all of a sudden they'll say, well, you're going to get that $100,000 to do your project. Oh, and by the way, you're going to have to sign this form over here that you're going to comply with climate action plan, with data management. We are walking into one heck of a minefield. Now, granted, there's state money out there, but do we sell ourselves down the drain and our rights down the drain to get our own money back in the form of a grant from California Department of Water Resources? This morning here, you're going to have a presentation by Mr. Guy of NACWA, Northern California Water Association. NACWA tried for years to try to get a plan going. They finally gave up. And the main reason they gave up was because the California Department of Water Resources kept changing the ground rules. And they're changing the ground rules through this. If somebody reads through this whole 84 pages of this, you look on page 74, you got to fill a form out to even apply, telling you that you know this. And most of the board members in TAC committee have not even read, by their own admission, have not even read the 84 pages that's driving this whole thing. So this county, you need to be worried about what's going on with this. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Cann. Mr. Kirk, followed by Mark.
As usual, I agree with Mr. Cadd. I am Don Kirk, as you know. I am here today. I was going to speak next week on this, but I work for an international nonprofit. I've worked in media most of my life, either on stage or in management. And there's a project we're working up in Oregon. I've been waiting for 8 months now for a grant to come in, actually for a couple of grants, and the one is coming in. So in the future, even though I would like to be here, I'm not going to be around that much, a couple of days a month only. I'm keeping my residency here, but I'm going to be up in Medford, Oregon, and I do appreciate everything you have done, how polite you are and everything, but I would like to see also that meeting that was promised to us, the public hearing, to take place, and I don't know how long it takes to set it up, but I would like to have it done, and I will come back for that meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kirk. I'm glad you didn't wait till next week because we're not going to have a meeting. You would have missed out. So I'm glad you came today. And as far as the meeting, we are working on that. That's the meeting today. The information we're passing on today is another step in educating people about water issues before we move on to the IRWM workshop, which we did say we would do in the summer. We would probably plan it, I would think, probably after our July recess. So, Mark, I think it's Samet, followed by Linda Vu.
Hello, my name is Mark Samet. I actually have something for everyone here. Something kind of special. It's a special report that my organization, which is the LaRouche Political Action Committee, has put out. Like the basic point, and some of my colleagues will kind of flesh this out a little bit more in detail, but as most of the people in this room understand, the United States is in a deep political as well as economic crisis. And it's been going on for some time, but as people in this county probably understand better than anyone, the infrastructure in the United States is in a dismal state. And you know, most of the southwestern states in particular have a huge issue with one of the most important resources in the world for any kind of development, and I'm talking about water. And there was a project which you're holding in your hands, NWAPA 21. It's an updated version of the Parsons Corporation policy from the 1960s, a policy called the North American Water and Power Alliance, which John F. Kennedy was very excited about, was actually on the stump for when he was making his dedications right here in this county. So what is NWAPA 21? It's the largest continental development project in the history of mankind. We're talking about 95 dams. We're talking about increasing the irrigable land in the southwest states by double. We're talking about building some of the largest reservoirs in the world. And we're talking about 6 million jobs for the United States in high-skilled areas. And this is something that our Political Action Committee is on a full mobilization for right now. We're in Alaska, we're in Montana, we're in Idaho, we're in Texas, we're here in California. We're organizing on the county level, on the state level, and on the federal level to get a project like this going so we can kickstart out of this economic hell and actually deal with some of these problems, the long-term problems of generating wealth. So this is something, we put out a resolution right here, which I'll also give to the members of the council and anyone else in the audience who wants them. But this is a resolution which you can actually endorse. And right now we're just in the beginning phases of doing this, but this is a project which is shovel ready to go. And we're going to have to bust through a lot of the constraints, a lot of the silly bureaucratic parameters which have prevented any kind of long-term development from taking place over the recent 2 generations or so. But this is something that I really have to urge everyone in this room, read this, get behind it, figure out what we're actually doing here. Because, you know, if we have a disintegration of our banking system, right, if the European Union continues to topple, we're going to need to have projects in this country that give the rest of the world confidence that the United States is going to be around for another 100 years. So that's all I'll say right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Linda Vu, followed by Wes Vanderschaft.
Hi. So I'm just going to go ahead and read some portions of the emergency resolution. And I just also like to say that that I work with a real feisty group of fighters nationally around Lyndon LaRouche, who's never been off on his outlooks on economics and how he's been forecasting the collapse of this financial system. That we've seen the bailouts in the past 5 years now, from Bush onto Obama, that this is a complete and utter failure. Bailing out Wall Street, bailing out JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and that it can be stopped immediately with such acts like the Glass-Steagall Banking Act. But yeah, we're pretty excited about the fact that we can provide for the next 25 to 50 years a sense of how we can rebuild this nation. So here it is. In Emergency Resolution NWAPA 21, Restoring the System of Public Credit. In 2007 to 2008, the United States Congress missed the opportunity to attack and eliminate the speculation-based financial system. The financial bubble created over decades had finally burst, but proposals to protect the real economy from the collapse of fictitious asset values were ignored or blocked. The failure to implement available solutions in the interests of the nation led to a continuous series of financial bailouts by the Bush and Obama administrations, forcing city, state, and federal governments to initiate and carry out severe austerity measures on behalf of the speculative investment banks in the United States and Europe. Hospitals, schools, police forces, and other forms of vital social infrastructure have continued to disintegrate, and millions of American families have lost their livelihoods, including long-term employment in productive jobs, life savings, and homes. And I'm just going to then skip to the actual proposal because it just kind of goes on here. Such a plan is immediately available as presented in the LaRouche PAC special report, which proposes A, re-implementing the Glass-Steagall Act of '33, which would revive the separation between commercial banking and the securities business, as proposed in H.R. 1489, with the intention to direct enact B, a restoration of the U.S. system of public credit by means of the construction and requisite methods of funding of NWAPA 21. The NWAPA 21 plan includes the following: a water and power proposal employing a vast number of industries involved in material and machine production, which are vital for the United States to develop and salvage, as well as new infrastructure routes stretching most of the continent, providing millions of Americans and Canadians long-term employment and training a new generation of highly skilled workforce. Its construction will provide the basis to industrialize northern Canada and Alaska for the first time, while reviving the once proud Rust Belt state economies of the United States.
Okay, if you could sum up, your time's up.
Sure. The utilization of 11% of the runoff Alaska, Yukon, and British Columbia as a permanent source of water to double food production in the U.S. Southwest and northern Mexico, turn would-be floodwaters in one area into means of fighting drought in another, bring water to the dry Canadian prairie provinces, create an industrial resource canal throughout the heartland of Canada, and halt the water wars between the western states.
Okay,
So
thank
I
you.
just urge everyone.
At the beginning, you didn't state your name. Could you state your
Oh,
name, please?
Linda Vu.
Thank you. Thank you
Yes.
very much.
Yeah, thank you.
And Wes, is it Vanderschaff?
Vanderscaff.
Scaff. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Wesley Vanderscaff, also a member of the LaRouche Political Action Committee. I would like to kind of pull people's attention to a major crisis in the nation that is hitting us, especially with the young people, the future generations that are coming in, that will be the future leaders of the nation. It was brought to our attention on our website. There's some interviews with different people in the Congress and other places that are fighting, that many of our young people are coming back from long tours of duty in Afghanistan and Iraq. Many of them, I think the statistic was 1 out of 3 of our soldiers are coming back with mental illnesses like post-traumatic stress disorder. This is destructive. This is the longest war in U.S. history that we're in right now in Afghanistan and Iraq. And we have young people that are being deployed into this region that have no sense of winning this war. They have no sense of actually accomplishing anything with the war. Afghanistan, the talk has been up to 2020, like above 2023, I guess, to have a deployment in Afghanistan for training. What is the purpose of this? What sense of future do these guys have that are going into being deployed there? And it's really tragic. And what we're fighting for projects such as NWAPA for is that we have to actually, we're in a real fight. And obviously our Congress is very, they lack in a lot of things, to say the least. And there has to be a real fight from the American citizens and on local levels to really put pressure to give people a future right now. And that's really what this project is, this NWAPA, the North American Water and Power Alliance. The idea is we want to bring, the statistic was 11% of the runoff from Alaska, Yukon Territory, and British Columbia. And it was brought to my attention that this region, that's about a 100-mile strip of land from the Pacific coast up inland, a 100-mile strip that stretches across the British Columbia, Yukon, and Alaska, that's about a quarter of the entire continent's precipitation. That should be utilized. That all goes into the ocean. It's not really utilized by life. There's a lot of life there, and it doesn't utilize nearly any of the water. And we should bring the water here. This is a project that will create many jobs, 6 million, upward of 6 million jobs. And they're not make work. It's as we know from the history of this region, that there's a real idea of making a commitment to a nation as a whole. And we ask you guys to contact us. If you have our emails, please contact us and be in touch with our movement around this project. This is something we should be doing as a nation right now. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Wesley. Okay, that's all the speaker request forms I have. We will move on to the board presentations. R1. Receive an update from Northern California Water Association activities from the NACWA President David Guy. And as Mr. Guy gets up here, get ready, I just would remind people that The Northern California Water Association has a number of members in it. There are 3 counties that are members of this, Butte, Tehama, and Shasta. There are 2 county members that sit on that board. Tehama County has Bob Williams, and I sit on it for Shasta County. I asked Mr. Guy to come here today because, as you know, I come back from my meetings when we have those and give reports back to the board and to the public, but I wanted to have an opportunity for the board members to hear directly from Mr. Guy what the services and the advocacy that they provide for us on water issues. And I will tell you that Mr. Guy will do a little bit of a self-introduction here, but he's extremely knowledgeable about water issues, and I think we're very fortunate to have him as our president of NAWQA. So, Mr. Guy, thank you for coming up here today.
Thank you, Supervisor Modi. Can you hear me if I stand
Yes.
back here?
Yes.
Great, okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Supervisors. It's a real pleasure to be here today, and good to see everybody here in the room. Northern California Water Association represents water suppliers and local governments, as Supervisor Modi mentioned, throughout the region from Sacramento north to Redding, of course, the Sierra Nevada on the east, the Coast Range on the west. And of course, the real common mission, of course, is to protect the water rights and the water supplies for this region, both now as well as, of course, into the future. We're real pleased. Supervisor Modi is a tremendous leader in the organization, and we appreciate his work that he does, not only on behalf of NAWQA, but of course for the region and all the good work in this supervisor chamber. We're also fortunate, Pat Minturn, we work very closely with Pat, who's been a wonderful person to work with over the years, and then Stan Longberg and David Cox are also here in the room, of course, folks that are making sure that water is being provided to folks within this county. So I was going to do a quick flyover today of some of the water issues and the challenges facing, of course, Shasta County, and then I'm going to try to go as fairly quickly, and I'd love, of course, to have time for questions and conversation if that's possible. I think it's always helpful to start with looking at what's the statewide water picture look like as of right now. And I think everybody knows this was kind of an odd year. We had that kind of dry spell at the beginning of the year and then the late rains. And it, as the water managers in the room will attest, it's been a crazy year to try to put water into people's ditches and in people's homes. But the long and short of it is that the water supplies for the Central Valley Project, for the most part in Northern California this year, are at 100%. Whether you're one of the settlement contractors like ACID, Redding, or some of the water service contractors, which includes, of course, Clear Creek, Bella Vista, and others. The M&I contracts are still at 75%, which is a little bit of a problem, but the rest of the supplies are at 60%, and then, of course, a bunch of individual water rights that varies, but most of those are around 100% this year, not all. I'm going to give a quick flyover of the Bay Delta, and of course, when you sit in Redding here, you know, you look south at Sacramento probably in a lot of crazy ways and kind of go, what's really going on in Sacramento? And of course, water is no exception to that. There's a lot going on in Sacramento with respect to water, as I think folks know, and I'm going to try to give a quick flyover of that. Long and short of it is, when you cut through the what's going on, the 2 issues that we're focused on are flows and fees, the 2 F's. The question of, are we going to have to put additional water into the river to fix the delta problems, and are there going to be additional fees and other potentially taxes on folks in Northern California? And so I'm going to go over that a little bit. The regulatory landscape is really driving the discussion. There was a major legislative package back in 2009, as probably folks remember, and out of that came a variety of regulatory proposals. And is what these proposals tend to look at, again, with respect to flows, is you'll see terms like let's restore the system to a natural hydrodynamic. The State Water Board talks about unimpaired flows, and then there's other terms, but essentially all of these are the question of, do we need more flows in the Bay Delta? And of course, the question that all of you are asking, that we ask, is where is that water going to come from? I'm going to go through 4 quick processes. The State Water Board, the SWRCB, is the process that has control over water rights in California, at least most water rights. And they are going through a process right now of updating a Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan. They have started on the San Joaquin River system, and so we've been watching that process very closely. And again, looking at trying to provide additional flows into the delta from the San Joaquin River. There was a hearing last week where they have begun the process on on the Sacramento River to look at the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan. And the important part there is that the State Water Board seems to be looking at this unimpaired flow concept, which again is trying to restore the system to more of a natural concept, and they're looking at 60%, 40%, and 20% of unimpaired flows. And I'll talk about that in a moment because we've had some of our expert modelers look at that, and I will talk a little bit about what the impacts of that might be on Northern California. The Water Board is going to be having workshops later this year that we have been working with them on trying to fashion so that we get some good science into the process, if possible, including some science, of course, that talks about Northern California. And then they're hoping to have a plan by 2013 on this Bay Delta. So this is one that we have to watch very closely. Obviously showing a picture here near and dear with Lake Shasta, and the bottom line is that when you look at those percent of unimpaired flow concepts that I just mentioned that the State Water Board has thrown around, our modelers have shown is that you will reduce carryover storage in Lake Shasta drastically in devastating ways during certain years. And of course, as we all know, and you know better than anybody, that has a variety of impacts on this community. It obviously has water supply impacts to certain folks that rely upon that storage. It has recreational impacts. It has hydropower dynamics. I think as folks know, we have been joining with Reading Electric Utility on a series of letters. Also SMUD, the Public Works Department in Reading, has been really focused on some of the hydro issues as well. And then of course it also affects salmon and the cold water pool for salmon in the area. So when you look at what the State Water Board has proposed, this is, I think, a pretty accurate picture of what some of their proposals would look like. Again, the numbers have basically said that you would reduce carryover storage. And could you imagine going into this current year if we did not have the carryover storage in some of these reservoirs? Remember those early dry periods in the year. And you know, the good news in California is that people were very nervous, but nobody was panicking because we had carryover storage, right, for all the variety of purposes. Well, the proposal from the Water Board would reduce this carryover storage on the magnitude of 2.2 million acre feet. That's a lot of water to a million acre feet under a 40% scenario. There would also, of course, be a resulting increase in groundwater use. And the bottom line is that, in my view, it would debilitate California's ability to prepare and serve water during drought because of that ability to not store water. So we have basically obviously been very engaged in this process through Northern California Water Association, working with the managers and the local governments throughout the region, a variety of partnerships. The effects, of course, would be not only on the water supplies, the economic engine for the region, but also on the Pacific Flyway, the birds. It would be on the salmon. The cold water pool would be drastically affected. The hydropower issues are quite stark when you look at changing this, and then, of course, look at recreation and groundwater pumping. And we have articulated this in some fairly sophisticated ways, not only making the statements, but also having some of our experts with science supporting these comments. Again, the Water Board is having workshops later this year on a variety of these topics, again looking at salmon, the fish in the delta, and then of course the water supply effects, including both water supplies and hydropower. One of the things that, of course, we like to mention in Sacramento is that there's already a variety of in-stream flow requirements in the North State, and this is a map that just shows some of these. The system is tightly regulated. All of these agreements have been designed around trying to balance between the economic purposes and, in most cases, salmon in the North State. And, of course, any proposal in the Delta, in our view, would adversely affect the ability to meet all of these various purposes in the North Delta. So there's a variety of existing requirements, many of which you're familiar with in this area. Switching gears, the second part of the discussion, the biological opinions. These are the opinions that are issued by the federal fishery agencies. And I'm not going to talk a lot about these, but these govern the operations of the State Water Project and the Central Valley Project. You may have heard last year there was some litigation that came out of the Fresno court that kind of put some of these in disarray, and so the agencies are back looking at these biological opinions. And again, we've been weighing in with our biologists, with our hydrologists, our modelers, and again, trying to make sure that these biological opinions are advanced in a rational way for Northern California. One of the frustrating parts to a lot of folks is that those biological opinions have not been a very satisfactory process, and so some folks in the southern part of the state have looked at this Bay Delta Conservation Plan, and you hear probably a little about BDCP. And of course, that is what gets focused on in this process is the idea of delta conveyance, moving water through the delta, you know, kind of the peripheral canal debate, the, you know, through delta, whatever you want to call it. But there's an aggressive effort to advance the Bay Delta Conservation Plan process. In Northern California, we have made a very strategic decision, working with all of our legal folks, to not be a part of that Bay Delta Conservation Plan because we don't need the coverage under the Endangered Species Act in Northern California. But with that said, we are very much engaged in the process, talking to folks on a regular basis, making sure that those impacts from this project are not going to be redirected to Northern California. But again, the issues in this, of course, are flows and fees. And we have had a variety of correspondence recently with the Resources Agency, and again, they keep assuring us that we do not contemplate the use of any water from the Sacramento Valley. But again, we're not taking that as the gospel. We are, you know, again, looking at every modeling aspect of this, and we'll continue to stay very engaged in that. The final piece is the Delta Plan. This is the Delta Stewardship Council. They just came out with a draft last week of their new plan. We're still kind of sorting through that. There still seems to be a kind of an effort to try to, again, go to this somehow this natural hydrodynamic, which again can have an impact on Northern California. We're going to be sorting through that, engaging with the Stewardship Council. The Stewardship Council is not a regulatory body, but it uses kind of a political pulpit to encourage some of the other regulatory bodies that we just talked about to act. And again, we're going to be watching for flows and fees. Finally, on the fiscal side of the equation, obviously very much of an interest, we have been in litigation with the State Water Board. Going on 9 years now. We had a case that went to the California Supreme Court on the, you know, the validity of the State Water Board fees, and that case is now back to the trial court, and we're going to be going to trial on that in December of this year. And again, we're very concerned with the way the State Water Board has imposed fees on water right holders in Shasta County as well as elsewhere throughout the state. And there's obviously going to be a lot of discussion. Everybody's watching, of course, the governor's revenue plans with interest, and of course the one way or another, whether those pass in November or not, we're all going to be watching the fee element very closely with respect to water issues, of course, as well as other issues as well. So I'm going to kind of leave it at there. I think the important thing is we, of course, keep making sure that we do not believe that the Sacramento Valley, of course, should be sacrificed for the benefit of the Delta. There's a lot of interest in the Delta, both for export water supplies as well as flows into the ocean. And of course, we believe that the Sacramento Valley is a special place, and obviously you live that every day. You're leaders in that effort, and so that is where we have really been focusing. And we have a website, obviously, for those who are interested. Again, I really want to thank the leadership of Supervisor Modi and others in the room on water issues, and would welcome questions or any conversation that you would like to have. So thank you for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you, Mr. Guy. A couple things before I ask for some questions. You would take the opportunity to just give us a little oversight of your background?
Yes, yeah, thank you. I have had the opportunity to work in the water world. I guess it's been almost 20 years now, and have a little bit of a multidisciplinary training. I'm a lawyer by training, and don't hold that against me, but in the water world, that's a valuable tool. And also a geology by training, so I've been able to integrate that. And I've had 2 stints at Northern California Water. Started there back in, I want to say, 99, and was there for 8 years. And then I had the opportunity to go down and run a nonprofit in Yosemite, so went down there for 3 years. And then just by a change of some circumstances, I came back here 2 years ago. And so I've really enjoyed the challenge, and of course love Sacramento Valley, love what you all do, and want to make sure that we have water for this region for the future.
And I mentioned that, you know, there are some counties that are members of NACWA, but there also are other water agencies and water users in general. Does that kind of cover it, or is there a little bit more?
Well, it's really, we're bound together, of course, by water and the need to protect the water rights and the water supplies for the future. So yeah, it's a variety of water entities. That includes water districts, water companies, municipalities, and then of course the counties. So it's kind of a broad array of folks that either serve water or care deeply about water.
So I'll look to see if anybody from the board would have some questions. Mr. Kehoe?
Mr. Guy, thank you for your presentation this morning. As you may recall, during the open time section of our agenda, one of our speakers expressed to us a certain amount of skepticism, or if you will, caution in dealing with the state of California. Do you have any observations about his observations?
Well, I think, it's easy to say, yeah, we ought to, absolutely, we have to have caution with the state of California. There's a lot of, we all know where the economic centers of this state are, and they're to the south and the west, and you have the one thing in this region that everybody else in the state wants, and it'll probably always be that way unless something miraculously happens with respect to technology. So yeah, I think you always proceed with these with a very much of a caution, but I think the important thing is that I do think the most effective defense against that is local control and managing the supplies at the local level through the way the districts do it in Shasta County and elsewhere. And I think anything that you can do to improve management, to encourage management, to protect those water rights and supplies, I really believe that is the most effective defense against the state, against the federal government, and those pressures are always going to be there. So I don't think that you can, it's really a game of perseverance in my view. You can't let up for a second, because if anybody blinks, that's when bad things happen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Haas?
Well, earlier on we had a presentation about this NWAPA 21, and they mentioned building a lot more dams. What's the chances of building more dams? We need the Sites Reservoir built. We've talked about this for years.
Yes. Yeah, you and I've had that conversation for years.
We've had it for a long time.
Yes, no, thank you. Yeah, I didn't mention that, but I really should have. And, I think there's two projects in Northern California, of course, that have had quite a bit of study, and that includes the Sites Reservoir just west of Maxwell, as well as, of course, the opportunities to raise Shasta. And those are, different projects, but they're both, I think, they have a lot of merit. There's the feasibility work, some of that came out last year on Lake Shasta, and so I think folks have had a chance to look at that. I think, again, there's some real value that could come from that potentially, and a lot of questions, obviously, too. Sites Reservoir, there's going to be an environmental document on that later this summer, and I think that will be a real good glimpse for people to look at the water supplies. And again, I think the important part of these projects that I see is that, they're really not projects for Northern California per se, but they're projects that can help provide an additional amount of water into the Delta for uses in other parts of the state, and in turn, that will, hopefully allow this region to continue to utilize its water supplies into the future. So the reality is we do need to improve our water infrastructure in the state of California. You mentioned the challenges with that. We all know that the regulatory climate is tricky in the state of California, but again, it's a game of perseverance, and I think that these good projects are ultimately going to be built because the state of California needs them.
Well, they mentioned the fact that the runoff on the 100 miles from the ocean, all the way up from clear to Alaska to Mexico, it gets the rainfall because it's close to the ocean. So there's got to be a way to trap more of this instead of letting it run. Just like this spring, we didn't think we were going to get anything last winter, and then all of a sudden it came on, and luckily it did, because the lake's in good shape, but that was kind of a fluke. We don't get wet springs like this all the time to take care of those problems. So I noticed your picture there had Shasta Lake pretty low back in 76, 77. That's when that thing was low. It was just a big pond. So
yeah, and you guys know what that means for this community. That's the proposal, is that you would have that in a lot of years. It's pretty scary stuff.
And I was just going to follow up on Supervisor Kehoe's comment about the concerns with the state and Proposition 84, and I'm sure you're familiar with Proposition 84. Is it something that we can just walk away from and ignore, or do we have to, or we need to be part of that process and try to take advantage of what's there?
Well, I think the important thing in my view is to just keep the local energy going and do what you need to do locally to protect the water supplies, improve the water supplies. I think that's really the important thing. There's times when grant funding makes sense and will help advance that, and then there's times when it probably doesn't make sense. But I think, you make a local business decision on how you want to proceed with that, much like you do every day on, whether you want federal funds for this or federal funds for that. You make a calculated business decision, and that's the way I look at it. And I think you've got a lot of really good leadership in this area, in this region, and in this local area. So, you know, I think you make the best decision you can as you go forward.
And I'd like for you to just maybe just sum up with, I know that the agency and you, and along with our chair, advocate for a lot of issues. Could you just give us a little snippet of some of the things that we've been advocating for lately on behalf of water issues for Northern California?
Yeah, thank you. Well, again, most of the emphasis right now is in this regulatory environment, just by the nature, and that, of course, means all the state agencies, a little bit of the federal side as well. We also obviously spend quite a bit of time over in the legislature. This year has been fairly quiet, I say that cautiously, on water, but we know that you know, next year probably won't be, so we're obviously spending a lot of time in the legislative arena. We spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C. as well, you know, working with the congressional delegation and the senators and trying to advance some good water policy in the state of California. And then again, you know, like most organizations, we probably have you know, more lawyers than anybody wants to admit, but that's the important part of the water world. We have the best legal team in the state. I absolutely believe that, and doing a lot on the communication front, because again, I think we have to tell the story of this region and why water is critical to this region, and why people in LA should want water to be in this region. It's a hard story to tell, but it's one that we have to tell because they've got the numbers.
And I think that's what we've been doing over the last about year or so, trying to actually put information out about the uses of the water and how it occurs locally, and even our agriculture users provide more than just the food they raise. It's the wild fowl that use that, and the flyways, and so it's all interconnected, and there's a lot of multiple uses for that land and the water that's on it. So.
Yeah, no, that's really the Sacramento Valley. You guys know that very well. It's really that way that the systems are all fully incorporated, where you're managing water for farms, you're managing it for the refuges, the flyway, you're managing it for salmon. You know, that's just the world of water management today, and the Sacramento Valley, I think, does that better than anybody else in the state, and I think we ought to stand proud about that and try to convince the rest of the state that they ought to leave this region the way it is, because it's the best kept secret in the state.
And could I have you just repeat the website again for people who want additional information?
Yeah, thank you. It's www.norcalwater.org, so norcalwater.org.
Well, thank you, Mr. Guy, for coming. We certainly appreciate the time coming all the way
Thank
up here.
you. It's a real pleasure to be here and great to see you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next item is R2, receive a presentation, Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation Division on adult parole. And Director Dave Nichols will be giving that. Mr. Nichols.
Good morning. My name is Dave Nichols. I'm the parole administrator for the Shasta District, which covers pretty much everything north of I-80 to the Oregon border. My offices are located in Redding, Butte County, Tama County, and down in Woodland. We have approximately 100 parole agents supervising 16 counties in that district. I was asked to give you guys just a brief overview of what our department's facing as an agency since the implementation of public safety, also known as AB 109 realignment, enacted by our governor back in October of 2011. From June 30, 2011, the state of California had a total parole population of 162,368 offenders under supervision. As of the beginning of this month, it's down to 137,119. That's a drop of 25,249 statewide. What that means is those offenders didn't go anywhere. They were just reassigned to county probation as opposed to state supervision. Mr. Foreman will speak shortly, I guess, on the impact what that is having locally. As far as the state numbers go, it's roughly a 26% reduction since the enactment of this realignment. What that means for my division is a 26% reduction in the population we supervise, a 26% reduction in the staffing that we have, and a 26% reduction in our facilities that we operate. It is estimated by the end of fiscal year 2014-2015, we'll have a 66% reduction overall statewide. What that means locally is a 66% reduction in my staff here and their service in the community. Right now, we're currently in negotiations with the various labor unions on how to implement those layoffs, and after those resulting layoffs, we'll be in negotiations again on how to consolidate our facilities. It's been in the paper recently. We've recently consolidated the Marysville parole unit, closed that office, and although there were no staff reductions in that closure, it was just due based on operation, to consolidate operations into the surrounding parole units. That is being looked at through various locations throughout the state as we start losing our staff and losing our funding just to maintain our operations. We will still have a parolee population in the community to supervise that will still be supervised by parole agents who live and work in this community as they have been for years. Give you an example of what my staff is going through right now since realignment. John Smith is a non-high-risk sex offender who was convicted from Shasta County for Penal Code Section 288 for child molestation. His victim was a 9-year-old female who knew and trusted him because of his family's relationship. Smith also admitted in court that he was under the influence of marijuana when he molested the 9-year-old girl. Smith was released from state prison on March 25, 2012 after serving a revocation period of 9 months for violating sex offender-specific conditions of his parole. Due to him having admitted use of marijuana during his commitment offense, he has a special condition of parole that he shall not use, possess, or have access to marijuana. He also has a special condition that he must have approval for any employment due to his criminal history. On April 6, 2012, his parole agent noticed via his GPS tracks that he's frequented different locations and apartment complexes. Through further investigation, it was determined that he was attempting to do landscaping and handyman work at these locations which had children present. Smith was arrested for this violation, transported to Shasta County Jail, where he was booked and released on the same day due to population pressures of the jail. On April 25, 2012, Smith appeared at the Reading Parole Unit for a hearing on that parole violation. The Board of Prison Hearings assessed Smith 180 days in Shasta County Jail for that violation. He was transported and booked into Shasta County Jail on that same day. He was again released that same day due to overcrowding pressures. On May 7, 2012, while Smith was at the parole office, he was arrested for possession and use of marijuana, where he attempted to hide marijuana in the bushes in front of the office because he knew he was not allowed to have it. He was again transported and booked into the Shasta County Jail, where he was released the same day due to population overcrowding. On May 14, 2012, while Smith was in the parole office, he was again found in possession of marijuana, where he was again transported, booked, and released to the Shasta County Jail due to overcrowding. On May 16th, during a field visit, Smith's agent arrested him for possession of marijuana and possession of pornography. Smith was transported into the Shasta County Jail, where he was again booked and released due to overcrowding. On May 17th, Shasta County Jail released Smith at 3:15 in the morning. Instead of Smith going back to a transient area where he maintained a residence, which was compliant with Jessica's Law, he instead wandered through the downtown area of Reading, near a park, and stayed at the Good News Rescue Mission, which was not compliant with Jessica's Law. In interviewing Smith, the parole agent stated that Smith stated that he will continue to use marijuana and knew that he would not be held accountable for his actions. The second example I'd like to bring to your attention. Jim Doe is a lifelong Shasta County resident who has been in trouble with the law since childhood. His criminal behavior has escalated to the point where he's been in and out of the state prison system since 2005 when he entered as a juvenile. Jim Doe was most recently convicted in Shasta County for possession of marijuana for sale and eventually sent to state prison. Upon his initial release, he had numerous fresh arrests and violations of his parole, necessitating his return to state prison on 5 separate occasions. The latest occurred in August 2011, where Doe received a 9-month revocation period for absconding in supervision and use of marijuana. When Doe was released from state prison after serving his revocation period in January 2012, he was no longer under supervision of state parole, but Shasta County as a post-release community supervision case due to AB 109 prison realignment. Doe never reported to probation upon his release from prison, nor did he report to parole, remembering that he had a history of absconding. He continued to run the streets of Shasta County, and due to resources being stretched thin, avoided any meaningful police contact or returning to his former criminal lifestyle and chronic drug use. Joe's criminal behavior escalated to the point where he attempted to commit a violent act against a pregnant citizen. Watchful coworkers found Doe hiding behind her car with a knife, waiting for her to come out of her office. These coworkers scared Doe off, preventing untold harm. Shortly after that incident, however, Doe found his next victim, and this time was successful. Luckily, there was no serious injuries as a result this time. I bring those examples to you, and there's dozens more like that. I'm sure Mr. Foreman and Mr. Pasanko could share with you as well from their own agencies. We have a crime epidemic out there, and there is no easy solution in sight. We need to start working together as a community to address this as a community problem. We no longer have the luxury of saying that individual is supervised by a state agency, so therefore the county washes their hands of them. These are all county residents. They all came from this county, and together as a county, we need to do what we need to do to protect the public from these individuals. And that was the formation of the Community Correction Partnership, which Mr. Foreman is chairman of, and they've been working very hard on trying to come up with solutions on what is the best way, to manage this population. However, it is at a crisis point, and we do need to focus on it and address it together as a whole. This is not meant to point fingers or assign blame at any particular agency, but together, all of us as agencies need to come together and address this community as a community problem, because this is the community that we live in and which we serve. That's what I have for the presentation. Now, if you have any questions, I'd try to entertain them.
Any questions of Mr. Nichols? Mr. Baugh.
Thank you for your presentation. You mentioned working together from one agency to another. In your opinion, what would that focus on more than we are doing now?
Historically, there's been a division in the populations that are supervised. Probation had their population they supervised. State parole had their own population that they supervised. And since realignment, those populations have merged. It's not as clear-cut anymore what agency is responsible. Well, it's not as clear-cut anymore what crimes or what criminal histories each agency is going to supervise. The only defining factor is the current commitment offense. So somebody could have a pretty egregious criminal history, their current commitment offense be of a nonviolent nature, and they would be assigned to probation as opposed to parole. So we're dealing a lot with the same population. It just matters what their current commitment offense is, who they're assigned to. And since realignment, the state and Governor Brown's proposal, they've reallocated funding from one agency to another. Basically to help support the counties and the CCP programs. They balance that budget on the budgets of other agencies, including the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation and the Parole Division. Since June of last year, the contracts that we've had for resources and treatment have been pulled and defunded, which has left us with very minimal resources. The resources that we did have were community-based resources, that we've used together for years. Since the implementation of realignment and the CCPs, those resources have been combined as a county resource. We need to get together to view this as a community problem, not county probationers versus state parolees. It's all the same pool. It all affects the same community. Mr. Foreman has been great with working on trying to develop programs that would service both populations and not exclude one over the other. I ask that you keep that in mind when these proposals are brought to you for approval, because together as a community is the only way that you're going to, solve this. By denying a person services just because they're on parole and not probation, next month when they commit another crime, they will be on probation. Whereas we could prevent that beforehand. That's what it's all about. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Well, not entirely, no.
Okay.
I hear you stating a lot of challenges and problems from your perspective, and I understand that. These are changes for your department as well as for the county agencies as well. I also hear you alluding to perhaps you're defining the words working together as financial need. You're not saying that entirely, but I hear you kind of alluding to that. Have you put together, rather than just referring to the challenges that you're facing, have you put together a plan of attack? We've been hearing from our own county folks a very resourceful tool that's been developed to deal with the issues and the transference of population under AB 109. Do you have such a tool, and are you working in that direction as well? So not just an emotional expression, but a hardcore, here's what our goals are, here's how we're dealing with it. You mentioned 26% reductions earlier in finances and staffing, and you referred to a lot of thoughts, but I'm not hearing any hardcore direction from you.
Approximately 3 years ago, the Division of Adult Parole Operations started on what they call the 5-year roadmap, and in that involved using evidence-based practices and addressing criminogenic needs. Part of it involved a remedial sanction matrix on how to deal with violations and to best match the appropriate treatment for the appropriate offender. That has been in place now, like I said, for approximately 3 years, and that's the direction we've been going. The difficulty that we're running into now, and this isn't a Shasta County specific issue, this is more of a statewide issue, is the ability to enforce those remedial sanctions. When you have, for example, a drug treatment program in place that you want to assign somebody to attend that treatment, they ask you, well, what if I don't? And before the answer to you, well, if you don't, you go back to jail. Well, now, with the custody issues we have at the jail, and the overcrowding, they know that they're going to spend a couple of hours in jail, then that would be it. So the programs that we have in place and the sanctions that we have in place are no longer having the impact, that we would like, because the alternative there's no bite to the bark anymore. And that's not something that's just specific to my agency. That's specific to supervision in general as a whole. It's all your the patrol officers are feeling the same frustration and the chronic revolving door that we're facing. There's no real easy answer to it. But together we're trying to work together, partnership with the counties on dealing with that, on how best to deal with it as a community as a whole.
Thank you, Director Nichols.
Thank you.
Supervisor Kehoe.
Thank you, Chairman Modi. Mr. Nichols, thank you for your presentation this morning. I have a couple of specific questions. I tend to agree with my colleague this morning, Mr. Baugh, in that you've indicated we have a community problem, and I tend to agree with that. And then you say we ought to be working together. But in this morning's presentation, you haven't given us any substance as to how that should occur and what the nature of that collaboration should be. So perhaps that could be for another presentation, and maybe you're not prepared to do that this morning. Two questions. Number one, how many state parolees are in Shasta County this morning as we speak?
Well, let me address your first concern real quick.
Sure.
Historically, probation and parole have shared the same services within the community. Since realignment, those services have become more scarce, and they've had to consolidate those services. Part of what they're working on with the CCP concept is a day reporting center where we could consolidate those services in one location, to better serve this target population. And within that target population would include both probationers that are being supervised by county probation, as well as parolees that are supervised by state parole, meaning that they're all county residents, all within the criminal justice system, where they can all go to one spot to obtain services. And that's how we can work together to consolidate the valuable resources that we have. Your second question on how many parolees are in Shasta County as of this morning, I could not tell you specifically this morning, but I could tell you as of a week ago, it was 452.
452. Thank you. And then my final question, Mr. Nichols, is during your presentation you made mention of parolees being denied services. What did you have in mind? Or maybe I didn't understand what you were saying.
Before the implementation of AB 109 and the prison realignment, historically there's been, on certain key social services, a separation if you're under state jurisdiction versus if you're under county jurisdiction. For example, mental health services was one of those issues. The state offers some mental health programming locally. The county was reluctant to take on any additional mental health services if the person was being supervised by state parole. Over the past year or so, a lot of that has been worked out, to in the best interest of the community, to address the individual as a member of the community and not just the fact that he was just released from prison or not. We've had several meetings with the Shasta County Mental Health, and we have a much better working relationship with them now. And I just foresee that continuing to better itself as this process evolves. And that's one example of services.
In your judgment, are either parolees or people on probation being denied service, or is it that they're just not being offered service? Or I'm not clear as to what you're saying.
It's my opinion that there's a very limited amount of resources available to a much larger pool of people that need it.
Okay.
And in that, there has to be priorities set on who receives those services. There's only so much to go, only so many pieces of the pie to go around. And historically, that, from what I've seen, that has been divided up by criteria up to and including that if you were on state parole, you would not be first in line for your piece of pie. However, that is rapidly changing, and it is being addressed as a more, like I said, community-based situation based on actual need versus any other supervision that an individual might be under.
Okay. Thank you.
Supervisor Paul.
Thank you, Chairman Woody. Well, Mr. Nichols, since you've opened that door, I don't want to leave it just hanging there. We have representatives from Shasta County Mental Health Services in the room, and I don't want to leave the public with the impression that we're not attending to those in need. So with the Chair's permission, I would like to suggest the appropriate representative come and address that issue.
Great.
Well, we certainly can invite them up if they're prepared to talk.
Well, they may not be, but
Well,
I don't want to leave it just hanging there.
I didn't mean to put them on the spot or imply that they were denying services at this time. Prior to this realignment legislation, that was something that we dealt with. I know there's been previous administrations in place that are no longer in place now on both sides of my agency, as well as the county agency. Like I said, that relationship has been greatly improving since that time. But that was an example of separation of services.
Well, before we see if they want to come over or not, I see some more lights here. Before I go to my colleagues, I want to make a couple comments. One, before the realignment stuff, in the scenarios you gave where you had additional offenses, the marijuana, the other things, and in your scenario, they went back to the county jail where they got released because of capacity. Under the old system, what happened to them?
Under the old system, they would have been returned to state prison.
Thank you.
For the revocation.
Yeah, so I think that's the key that needs to be noted here. In the old system, the state was taking care of their part, and they would go back and deal with the state thing. Now, because of realignment and because of all the issues the state's having, they're now being forced back onto the local community and leaving the sheriff to try to deal with them, and he has enough issues already. The second thing I wanted to talk about is you mentioned several times about working together, and it's community, sort of a community problem, and we need to work together and stuff, and I agree with that. I guess what I'm sort of asking is that more of a rhetorical statement that we all should be doing that, or is that sort of like saying, well, we didn't do it before, but we need to do it now? I haven't quite figured out what you're saying there.
I guess what I'm attempting to do is more plant the seed, so to speak, that that is something that we are currently doing, and as the CCP evolves, and some of the different programs evolve from that. You know, when presentations come up before the board or requests for funding comes up before the board, it's just something to, you know, I'd like the board to keep in mind.
Okay. Because, Mr. Nichols, and this is not aimed at you, this is aimed at the state and maybe some of your predecessors. But quite frankly, as my time as the police chief, and particularly for my predecessor, Chief Blankenship, he did battle, and I mean battle, with parole over issues and found them not very cooperative at all. And quite frankly, we found our probation department to be a great partner with us on dealing with stuff. So I feel like a little bit the county's getting thrown under the bus here a little bit. I don't think that's your intent. And it's certainly, my comment's not aimed at you, because this is prior to your time, I'm sure, as being the, you know, the supervisor. But I have sort of a different opinion, I think, than what you're suggesting. So, but let's hope that what we are doing today is continuing to work together as a lot of agencies who are facing the same issues, the same problem: lack of funding, a lack of personnel, lack of services. And you're right, we do need to pull all of our stuff together and do what we can with what's available to us. So.
Well, you hit on a very key point there, and that was something that I noticed when I did take over this area. And, you know, that is something that, again, I'm working with, on my side, with my staff, you know, on those relationships, and, you know, viewing them as not a state employee, but they're here to serve this community in which they live in, which they work in. And so together, I hope we can change some of those past relationships.
I think that's great, and I applaud you for your efforts. Mr. Kehoe.
As to as to Supervisor BOS' suggestion, perhaps we could hear the next presentation by our probation department and then revisit his invitation to ask our people from mental health to make comments, if it meets with the pleasure of the chair.
That's certainly fine with me. And then Supervisor Hawes.
Well, I just had a comment. I'm sure that if there were good jobs for these people when they were released, we wouldn't have so many problems with them, would we?
That's a very good point.
Yeah, and there's the economy says it right there why we're having so many problems. We just don't have the jobs for them. If there's nothing for them to do, they're going to get in trouble. That's been their history, and they continue to do that, I do believe. So the key is to get an economy going again, and we'll get rid of a lot of these problems. So what can we do? You know, we're trying here in this county, and yet we have people that are fighting us, so never ends.
Mr. Nichols, thank you for your presentation. We hope you can maybe be able to stay, if you're available, for the next part of this presentation, in case you have some additional comments or something after Mr. Foreman presents his. But thank you again for taking the time and coming before us.
Thank you. All right.
Okay, the next item is R3, receive a monthly progress report from Chief Probation Officer Foreman regarding AB 109.
As we're taking a moment to set up the PowerPoint presentation and just make a couple of comments, Mr. Nichols has been very responsive to the county as soon as realignment was put into place, and I believe that he was placed in a little bit of an awkward situation in front of you today. It's pretty easy with realignment to try to lay blame someplace. I don't think that the state had adequate resources to serve this population. We could always find ways to make it better. As the county was asked to help out with the state, resources were not as sufficient as we thought they were going to be. But we're all doing the best, and I think that I just wanted to reiterate that Mr. Nichols has been responsive, and he's been attending all of our Community Correction Partnership advisory meetings and such, and answered all our questions, and has been as helpful as he can. All right, just a couple open comments. Chairman Modi, members of the board, my name is Wes Foreman. I'm the Chief Probation Officer. Today I'm presenting a monthly progress report on realignment in Shasta County. Although the slides that you'll see, the numbers do not appear to be changing significantly, it is important that you and the public are kept abreast of the progress that is being made. Today's numbers represent the first 7 months of implementation, and it is much too early to draw any significant conclusions. That being said, collecting and organizing numbers at the beginning of a project is important and can alert to impending concerns. In my opinion, the numbers on the first slide that I'll show you are the most important in this phase. The concept of realignment from the outset produced fear and concern for the public. It was thought that our communities would be flooded with a new wave of serious, dangerous criminals, and that they would risk the safety of neighborhoods by committing crime after crime after crime. Early numbers do not support that claim. It is also important to understand that the county is only 7 months into implementing a plan that is the most significant change to criminal justice in quite some time. It is my belief that your county agencies are up to the task. It is not, however, without challenges. The most significant challenge has been the difficulty of recruiting and hiring staff, resulting in not being able to fully implement several components of the plan, namely the opening of the third floor of the jail and only partially operating the work release program and the home electronic monitoring programs. Although slow, progress is being made. Next month, the Community Correction Partnership Executive Committee will provide you with an updated plan. The plan will report on the progress that has been made and further discuss the challenges we face. More importantly, it will provide you with our recommended strategies for fiscal year 12-13 to address the supervision and management of the new realignment offender population. So this is the first slide I was talking about. The number of 238 realignment offenders being supervised is slightly less than I represented last month. And the reason is that that's what we have currently under supervision, and this number reflects some individuals that actually were supposed to, actually reported to us, and then because of their residence in another county that we were able to transfer them out, and we've had a few terminations of supervised probation. 50 of the 238, or 79%, are in compliance. And by compliance means that we have not filed a revocation of their supervision. 9 of those 238, or 3.78%, have been convicted of a new crime. Last month you asked for a list of the crimes that they've been committing. You'll notice that I represented that 9 people have been convicted of new crimes since October 1st, and there are 10 listed crimes. This is not intended to correspond with the number of individuals. This is a list of the crimes as we investigated those individuals, what crimes were listed in their convictions.
Mr. Foreman?
Yes.
Mr. Foreman, I'm just going to stop you for a second. Above that, your 50 of the 238 is obviously not 79%, and it's just a typo because on the paperwork that you gave us, it says 188 of the 238. So
I apologize for that. When I sent out those notes to you, I made some corrections, and I caught the error as well. So on your sheet, it's
correct.
wrong.
I'll make sure the public
the
saw
one
that,
that's on here, the 50 is correct.
Yeah, it should be 188 of 238.
No. The correct one is the 50. I'm sorry. The error was in the one I gave to.
Well, 50 is not 79% of 238.
Oh, okay. I caught my error. What I was thinking is that what I did is I reversed it to get the 79%. You're correct. I'm sorry.
I think the 188 are the number of people in compliance.
It would have been 19%, I believe, or 21% the other way. I'm sorry.
So if 79% are in compliance, then it's got to be the 188. Right.
It's supposed to be 188 because it's 50.
Are not in compliance, I think.
50 are not in compliance. I thought it was an error. I reversed it for the presentation, so what you have is correct. Apologize. These are updated numbers, just an activity report. In this past month of April, 9 new contacts from the compliance team, 6 new attempts at contacts, means that we attempted but failed to reach the individual at home. 8 new searches were done and 1 arrest. And the sheriff is here in case you want to have some questions later on. I just wanted to make sure of that. So there isn't significant change in the third floor, and if there are some questions about that, the sheriff will be able to address that a little bit later. The expanded work release program, in the slide I presented to you, had not been updated. There were 179. That was as of the end of March, and so that has been updated on this slide. There is currently 190 in the work release program. In the mandatory home electronic confinement program, we now have 42 in that program. It is running at half capacity due to our inability to get full-time staff there, but that's an increase of 10 from last month. The location of the site for the assessment center is still ongoing. Last month you asked for what the assessment center would actually look like, and this is a concept. Until we have the assessment center up and running, some or all of this may be part of it, or we may have to adjust depending on room, but this is part of the plan. We would house our probation special services unit. We call our special services unit the one that's managing the realignment population. We would hope to manage home electronic confinement personnel, community service. We intend to have the mental health clinician and the eligibility workers in that site. If space is available, then we'd have some virtual space to allow for someone from the jail to come over and manage the work release program from there and work with our offenders. Also, the compliance team could have some virtual space. There may be some programming space available for people that are not in the day report center, and of course we expect to have the day report center in there. Again, this is an activities report on the mental health and alcohol and drug services needs. To date, we have 138 assessments completed. 90 of those were assessed to need services, and the breakdown of the percentages for alcohol and drug and mental health services is below that. In public assistance, again, just reporting the activity, 126 applications so far, with 106 applications approved. 82 general assistance inquiries have been made, and there's currently an ongoing caseload of 20 active general assistance clients. This is just an update on how we're doing with our hiring. We are making progress, both on this slide and this slide. Obviously, we don't have everybody hired at this point. This slide is a change from last month. My report last month said that we expected twice the amount of the 9-month allocation in the first year. That would have been about $5.9 million. However, the formula committee has actually sent out their formula, and it actually boosted our amount to $6,253,582. It's a little bit better than we expected, not quite as high as we had hoped, but a little bit better. This formula is a 2-year formula. If the allocation amount goes up, the percentage that resulted in this $6 million would be attached to the next year's formula, and if the allocation is higher, then we'll get a little bit more. And this slide hasn't changed, just another reminder that we'll be coming to you next month with our new plan and our new budget recommendations. And then that concludes the presentation.
Okay, are there questions? I do have one request from the public to speak as well.
Chairman Modi, I would like to hear from the sheriff at the appropriate time as to the jail opening.
I didn't see him jump up there, but.
Yeah.
Good morning. Good morning, Chairman Modi and members of the board. Excuse me, Tom Basenko, Shasta County Sheriff. We currently have about 40 people that are in custody serving time for more than 1 year and up to 8 years in the jail. When we have those multi-year commitments, the jail was not designed for that, but then serving those multi-year commitments, it really puts us in a difficult spot, because then where do we put them? Most of the time, if you're going to be serving an 8-year sentence, that person probably will not succeed if they're doing work release, coming to work every day for 8 years to serve off their sentence, or for home electronic confinement that does have some requirements to have a telephone. That with those people that are in custody, that exacerbates the problem of having to try and hold people for pretrial or for technical violations, as Chairman Modi pointed out, for parole violations, probation violations, or the fresh arrests. Oftentimes people are arrested for burglary, possession of methamphetamine, auto theft, will be booked and released because those are primarily nonviolent property crimes, and we don't have the room for them there or the capacity because we're under a court order. And I do believe that this will probably get worse before it gets better, because there will continuing to be more people that are sentenced to jail for multi-year sentences who would have gone to prison in the past. We currently have about 6 people that are in custody, in addition to these 40, that are serving parole violations. Those parole violations would normally be served in prison, but now they will serve up to 6 months in county jail for those violations. And that does not count the ones that are here maybe awaiting or serving, being held for their parole violation until they have, but that's a very small amount. Regarding the hiring process, there was some errors in there. We have hired 2 correctional officers for the jail. There are 8 in background currently, and we have 2 service officers, and we have 6 in background, and we will be offering 2 job positions out of those 6 that are in background here today or tomorrow. For the correctional officers, we also have 8 in background. That's the same 8 that you see above at the jail, so not an additional 8. And the background process can take up to about 3 months. And then we have training for that on top of it. The hiring process for the jail has delayed. It seems like we take a step forward in getting some people hired, and then we have 2 step backwards where maybe somebody resigns, retires, or does not pass the probationary period, and that has caused a delay in getting people hired up. And in the background process, there are a lot of people that do not complete the background process or fail out of it because of things that we find, because there is a high standard for the background process. As Chairman Modi knows from being a chief of police, oftentimes we find something in there that is not acceptable for a correctional officer or for a deputy sheriff. But we are working forward as fast as we can, keeping the quality, and to ensure that we get the right people for the right job, and trying to get the floor of the jail opened as quickly as possible. That concludes my presentation. Any questions?
Are you getting anywhere close to predicting actually an opening date?
I won't, I'll try and get the floor of the jail opened as soon as possible, but it won't project a date, because it seems that Murphy's Law will show up. And again, sometimes we take a step forward but end up with 2 backwards.
Thanks, Sheriff.
Supervisor Kehoe.
Thank you, Chairman Modi. I have a question for Mr. Foreman, and I have a question for Mr. Lees. Mr. Foreman, the other day there was a very alarming article in the newspaper, and I received several calls about it, and people are very concerned. The title of this article in the local paper was "Police Parolee Carjacks Vehicle from Reading Woman." And I'm sure you're familiar with this. And he did so at knife point. And then on the conclusion of the article, it said that the individual has been released from prison and is on supervised probation under the Prison Realignment Program, AB 109. As you might imagine, people are alarmed by this sort of report. And so let's use this as an example and tell us what happens going forward now on this particular case.
Well, unfortunately, I do not have the specific information in regards to this individual, but just walking through the situation. This individual, if he was a non-individual, then and he had served his time in prison, then we would have received his packet to review and done our assessment of him in terms of his risk status. Assuming that he was high, he would have been placed on a high-risk caseload. My assumption is that because of what was mentioned in the article that later on that there was a call to his probation officer who placed a hold on him. So based on that information, then we work with the individual through their terms and conditions, and then to decide how often and when they should report. We monitor them as we do per the plan, and our attempt is to keep the community safe. Now, I will say that the system, obviously, if they're out in the community, is not foolproof, and this was an unfortunate situation. As I read the article, however, the relating of it being a realignment individual is just a statement of that, and the response from our officer was to place a hold. So that would be a natural response to somebody that had committed a crime in the community. It is, in fact, on these post-release community supervision individuals that if there is a hold placed on their terms and conditions, it needs to be done through the probation officer, so that protocol was managed appropriately, and we recommended the hold.
From a layman's perspective, such as my own, this seems like a pretty serious crime. I mean, it's fortunate that the woman wasn't injured. So is this individual going back to state prison, or is he going to stay in our community?
Well, depending on the charge, if his new charge ends up being a violent charge, which it sounds like to me, then he could actually get a new crime and go back to prison.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Foreman. Question of you, Mr. Lees. Ultimately, who is responsible for AB 109? Is it the 5 people up here?
Yes. Ultimately, it's the legislature that created the law. They're the one to put the laws in effect. But who bears the brunt and the responsibility of ensuring that it's complied with is the 5 Board of Supervisors that have been elected. Yes. You're the legislative body that authorizes, approves.
To that end, then, and I offer this suggestion to my colleagues, I believe that it would be helpful and beneficial if we have an independent analysis of what's being done in AB 109 on a local level. And I suggest to my colleagues that we charge you and your analysts with this analysis. I would hope that part of the analysis would include individual talks with all of the members of the Oversight Committee, including the judicial representation, and that you would bring us back this objective analysis of how we're progressing. And I offer that for the consideration of my colleagues.
Thank you, Mr. Keogh. Before we address that, I'll let that give our colleagues a chance to digest that a little bit, and I think I'll invite our public speaker up next, Mr. Alexander.
On that individual that we talk, I just wanted to make, the sheriff told me that that individual is still in custody.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity here today to address the board on the matter of the realignment report, specifically the siting of the Day Report Center. Now, of any group of releasees, there are 2 subgroups, the penitent and the impenitent. And where the impenitent go, they always and inevitably bring their behavior with them. And why is it that they must bring their behavior to the Breslauer area? The fact is that downtown is by far preferable to anything that is in too close proximity to any residential neighborhood. Does anybody remember the attempt at a Breslauer reentry facility back in late 2007? Consider this. 'Tis not the least bit necessary to imperil a residential neighborhood to rehabilitate the character of a convict. A downtown DRC would be in closer physical proximity to the EDD office, the Smart Center, the RABA downtown transfer facility, the Greyhound terminal, Amtrak, the jail, county courthouse, county probation, public defender, Empire Recovery Center, etc., than any potential Breslauer site. Nevertheless, it seems that Breslauer will come to mind as a sort of a reflexive choice for a dumping ground for the various kinds of persons, behaviors, etc., that some adverse to the siting of a DRC downtown can be expected to cite as reasons for opposition to the siting of a DRC assessment center anywhere downtown. Reflexivity, such as one would use when answering the question of how to spell relief after having seen a Rolaids commercial. By the way, without intending to give occasion for offense to the makers of the aforementioned antacid, relief is spelt RELIEF, not ROLAIDS. But such was the reflexive nature of the response. Remember the revolving door, the effect capacity releases have on crime rates, and the October 2007 controversy over whether to cite a reentry facility at Breslauer. The proper thing to do here is to abandon all thought of ever setting up a DRC at Breslauer. Downtown is by far preferable. Downtown is central, Breslauer is not. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander. Okay, any other questions from the board on this matter before we get to their discussion? Okay, I have a couple things. For Mr. Foreman, do we have any kind of timing yet for the day reporting center? Like, when's it going to be established? Do we know?
Well, as I mentioned last month, it's the site location that's most difficult, and we're continuing to review sites. We've reviewed as many as 10 right now. We need to put together a report for Mr. Lee's and also Mr. Starman for the city, because they're concerned as well. As our location, we are attempting to target the downtown area out of convenience. The size of the location puts a little bit of handicap on that. And of course, there is resistance, such as that was just mentioned before, even in the downtown area as well. So taking into account those things, we're trying to manage that as best we can. And like the sheriff, I don't want to say that I'd love to have it up as soon as possible. We already went through the RFP process and chose behavioral interventions as the agency that's going to manage the day report center in there, and they too are waiting for us to locate the site. So we're trying to do it as quickly as we can.
Yeah. Well, I guess I just would hope it'd be sooner rather than later. It seems like we've been working on this thing for over like 6 months plus now, and I'm a little disappointed we haven't actually narrowed it down to a couple of spots, and I'm sure it's hampering your efforts too. So
I'm disappointed that we haven't been able to move forward. We've had a couple of options, but in the end, they resulted in not being great options.
Thank you. The other comment I just wanted to make is sort of on behalf of the sheriff, I think, a little bit, is we're talking about opening the third floor of the jail, and I think sometimes there's this sense of what a relief that will be. Some other commercial, I think. That's going to take all the pressure off us, and it's just not true. I think people misunderstand that the third floor of the jail is not going to solve the AB 109 issue, because the capacity releases for the jail have been going on for 15 plus years, and I suspect that when they open the third floor, that within a month or so you'll have that thing full of higher risk offenders, and we're right back to the same situation you are today, where you're going to be releasing those no-no-nos or non-non-nons that you have, so.
You make an excellent point, Chairman Modi. We've had capacity releases since 1993. And then in 2009-10, when we had to close the floor due to budget cuts, that was about 128 beds. I would be surprised if it is last a month until it is filled. Once we get it reopened, it'll probably be less than a month for that 128 beds to be filled up almost immediately, and capacity releases will still be taking place there. And that's why there is such a critical need for additional jail bed space and for offender accountability, and perhaps even more importantly, is community safety.
Do you recall what your capacity release number was for last year?
3,600, about 3,600.
And I remember even as the chief, you were right around 2,800 to 3,000 in 2005 and 6.
They tend to are going up each year as soon as we have little sentencing changes for the laws. And then, of course, now with the impact of AB 109, they are going to be much higher, I think, next year when we look at this at the end of the year.
Thank you, Sheriff. Mr. Baugh?
Thank you, Chair Modi. I would note that we still have Supervisor Kehoe's suggestion hanging out there, and I had mentioned earlier my desire to hear from Health and Human Services regarding the issues that were brought up during the original presentation. Thank you.
Marta McKenzie, Health and Human Services Director and Mental Health Director. I think I'm going to do my best to answer the question kind of in a bigger explanation about mental health services in general, and that is our responsibility to prioritize services really as resources allow, is what the law says for mental health. And some of the folks referred from parole, perhaps, and from the 109 population do not meet our target population as serious mentally ill with a grave disability. So our capacity and our service target population is really a very restricted number of individuals. And so far from the 109 population, we've only had 4 folks who the state CDCR system felt met that higher standard of care. And we actually get their packets directly because they expect us to take on that mental health responsibility. There's a larger population in the state criminal justice system, however, who have mental health issues. They just don't rise to that level of severity. So the historical conversation that Brian from Parole is talking about is us, as our resources got more restricted over the last half decade or so, trying to look for other resources to serve clients in general in the community. Shasta Community Health Center has 2 psychiatrists. We have many of our clients, community clients, being served in the veteran system, in Hill Country Clinic, in other institutions, doing our best to serve that most in-need population of grave disability. So as parole had resources, licensed clinical social workers, psychologists, access to telepsychiatry, we encouraged them to take responsibility for their patients in as much as they could, and then we would do what we could. And I think as the relationship Brian described has gotten better, we've done a better job of ensuring the transition of care as folks got to the end of their parole supervision. So in the last 30 days or 60 days of someone's parole mental health care, we would then try to bridge that gap and make sure if someone needed medication support, we were able to take that on with our psychiatry staff, et cetera, or help them get to a community agency who could meet those needs. So I think that's somewhat answering your question. If not, please help.
No, it does. You've added great clarification. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for the sheriff or the chief probation officer? Okay. Seeing none, then I'm going to ask the board if they'd like to weigh in on Mr. Kehoe's suggestion. Mr. Kehoe?
Thank you, Chair Modi. Let me formalize my suggestion via a motion, and that motion would be that we charge Mr. Lees and his analysts with the responsibility of providing us with an independent analysis of how we're doing in AB 109. And I would anticipate that his analysts, or perhaps himself, would contact all of the members of the Oversight Committee perhaps members of the community and other organizations, and present to us an independent and objective opinion as to how we're doing.
Chair, I'm going to second for the sake of discussion, and then I have a couple questions.
Okay, go ahead.
For Mr. Lees, or for Mr. Kehoe first, do you imagine a financial impact here, and if so, where the money would come from to facilitate the study?
I'm seeing the financial impact to be minimal. I would see us using the talents of our analysts to do that. And I don't think there's a significant cost to doing it, but I will defer to Mr. Lees.
So you're suggesting within the course of their ability to facilitate it, as we do with other analysis. And then for Mr. Lees, not meant to insult, but this is a very specific. When you preface it that way, how do you not, right? This is a very specific area of. There you go. It's a good thing too. What qualifications would your team bring to the table to be able to analyze this particular subject? That's my question.
Extreme intelligence. I guess I'm looking at that, and maybe I could hope to answer that question if I have a little clarity into what is being asked here, and I'd like to propose something. Specifically, if we're talking about going through and doing detailed audits of how money is being spent, that would be one thing, and I would utilize, probably somebody from the auditor's office to help with that and bring in their expertise. Although I believe we have that because we do the budgets every year. What I view this as, if I'm hearing correct, and please tell me if I'm not, what I view this as is me leading a small team based on my leadership team to interview, analyze, and determine how far we've come since October or November when this has been rolled out, and where are we going, and could we have done it differently? Should we have done it differently? Is the time frame the same? I'm looking at things like that. Are we meeting the needs of all the committee members? I'm hearing that maybe we need to interview, and keep in mind the committee members are made up of more than just Shasta County employees. We have the police chief, we have the courts represented. So making sure, talking with all of them to make sure that the process in place is efficient and it's going the direction that they feel and as fast as they feel it could and should be. Look for their input and ideas, and I believe you're probably asking to be independent so that we just have an outside set of eyes looking at this. Do we have the ability and qualifications to do that? Absolutely. I would say absolutely. Unequivocally, yes, we do.
Thank you, Mr. Lees.
Mr. Hawes.
Well, I'm not sure that enough time has elapsed yet. We don't have that third floor of the jail open yet. We're kind of doing this under the cuff here, really. It's been October to now, not a long time. We've had just one severe, and this is not that severe. I mean, no one was injured. So I think we could let it ride a little while longer till we get that floor of the jail, because that's what they're going to tell you when you go interview them. We're not exactly ready here. We're trying to hire employees. We don't have that done yet. So the analysis is going to come down to those facts, and we can see them in the report that we got this morning. So I think we're just a little bit ahead of the gun here. Maybe after we get to the 1 year point, might be a good idea if things continue to go the way they are. That's my say.
I understand that. I appreciate that input, but I think it would serve the public well in having an independent assessment also. And again, I'm looking at something that's more high level. And Supervisor Kehoe, I don't know if that's what your intention was, but I think it would also serve the public well, because when we see these headlines and we see, arrows pointed at the 109 and the process and the realignment, I think it might be helpful to have an independent analysis that will also say, yes, they're doing what they can, or no, they're not. The other thing it does for us is it provides us an opportunity. We don't know where this 109 is going, and the one disclaimer I say whenever we have a presentation is that 6.2 million or 5.9, whatever it's going to be, that formula, that revenue hasn't been identified past this year by the state. And so although that's the formula and that's the money we should be getting, we're not absolutely sure it's going to be there after the state closes their $17 billion gap. So I think for us to be able to refine the process could be very helpful for us to be nimble in case we have to make other significant changes.
Mr. Hawes, you had another
Well,
comment?
I see that reasoning, but where are we going to find the expertise? I mean, not saying the analysts aren't brilliant, but this is a different avenue. This is what we hire people to do, and then we're going to go try to look and see what they're doing. I think it's kind of a tricky situation we're getting ourselves into here.
Yeah, you know, I see it just a little bit different. You made one comment, Mr. Lees, about going back and seeing if they did it right, and should they. I don't have any interest in doing that. I'd see from this day forward is where are we going? And I think the biggest question, I think Mr. Keogh's relating to, is are we getting there fast enough? Because as you mentioned, ultimately this board is going to be responsible for what happens with AB 109, regardless of the coordinating council. And I think there's that concern, and I have it, that we're not moving fast enough, that we're not getting things in place fast enough. And I think what I'm hearing is more the oversight of is where do we stand, and that, and sort of in the outside point of view. I agree with Mr. Hawes that I think that our law enforcement staff have the expertise to deal with the things that you've mentioned, Mr. Hawes, and that's what they're supposed to do. I think what we're just asking is perhaps a different set of eyes to look at some bigger picture of things, whereas they may be getting caught up in a little bit of the minutiae, trying to figure out all the details, and they certainly have plenty of that to do. Mr. Kehoe?
Permit me to be a bit more direct. I believe that there is an oppressive lethargy associated with the implementation of AB 109. I believe that we are proceeding at a snail's pace. I believe we ought to have contracts in force. We have staff managing those contracts. I think we ought to be providing service to the people that this program is intended to provide it to, and I don't think we're doing that, and I think all of us up here could benefit by having this independent analysis.
Any other comments? Then we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
I decided to go along with you after that speech. Good job, Supervisor Kehoe.
I'd also like to thank Supervisor Kehoe for taking the initiative to move that forward. We are on new territory, aren't we? And it is our responsibility. The buck stops here. Anything we can do, we should do to make sure we're doing it well.
Okay, in an effort to get out of here before 5 o'clock, we're going to move on to R4, board matters. We're going to have a proclamation for Airport Day. Supervisor Hawes, please.
Thank you. Shasta County Board of Supervisors proclamation, Airport Day, June 3rd, 2012. Whereas the Eastern Shasta County Sheriff's Flying Posse is planning their 65th annual Airport Day on June 3rd, 2012. And Airport Day includes an annual breakfast, antique, vintage, and modern aircraft from all over Northern California, Southern Oregon, and Western Nevada, motorized paragliders and model airplanes, and information and demonstrations from various county organizations, such as Search and Rescue, California Highway Patrol, Sheriff's Department, California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, and military groups that provide static aircraft displays and flybys. And the Eastern Shasta County Sheriff's Flying Posse provides valuable assistance for search and rescue operations and other activities at the request of the sheriff. Now therefore be it resolved that the Shasta County Board of Supervisors hereby proclaims June 3rd, 2012 as Airport Day in Shasta County and commends the Eastern Shasta County Sheriff's Flying Posse on their services in their community. And I'll move approval.
Second. Been moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
And this is signed by Chairman Modi.
Oh, thank you.
You're going to receive it, Tom?
Yes, thank you, Supervisor Hawes and members of the board. Tom Basenko, Sheriff Corner. It's a great event up there in Fall River. It's a great opportunity to see the improvements that have been made thanks to Pat Minturn and the board to the airport. This marks the 65th annual Airport Day for our all-volunteer flying posse. They do a lot of work for us, and as as Supervisor Hawes said, we have a pancake breakfast there. It's a great community turnout, and usually they also have a military flyover of Air Force jets that come in and static displays. So, and people come from Reno and the Redding area to participate and see the little bit of an air show or static displays that they have there. So it's a great event if you can get up there.
Congratulations on this, and we know that you'll be cooking pancakes, right?
Flipping pancakes.
He's a good cook, this guy. He's a lot of things that he can do very well. And I know the sheriff's posse does a great job up there, and we appreciate all of your hard work. And if you do go up there, it's a good idea to take earplugs, because the static flight comes right down over our beautiful new runway, and it's very noisy. So thank you, Tom.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Mangus, I was hoping you were going to comment.
I didn't get a proclamation. I don't get anything.
I've had a request to take a short break, but before they do that, I'm just going to identify which items are being pulled from consent calendar in case those who are staying for that will at least know where they're at and they can leave or not. The following consent calendar items are expected to be routine and non-controversial. They may be acted upon by the board at one time without discussion. Any board member, staff member, or interested person may request an item be removed from the consent calendar for discussion and consideration. And I have requests to remove to the regular calendar C6, C8, C9, and C13. Any other requests? Seeing none, then we're going to take a 3 or 4 minute break.